Hello, and welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. In this episode, Chris McFarland with Pulse will be sharing about managing the growth they experienced as they went from having an annual budget of about $750,000 a year to over $4 million this past year.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN Bullock, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors to share what's working. This podcast is produced every 2 weeks, and show notes are found at www.nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Come back often, and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Any links we talk about will be listed in the show notes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, thank you, Chris, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Kirsten. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Chris McFarland joined the Pulse team in November of 2010 as executive director. Prior to this, he served as a national festival director with the Luis Palau Festival for 7 years, and the Luis Palau Association is the technical name. And I met Chris through a festival that was happening in Orlando. As director, Chris moved to several major U.S. cities, building a team from the ground up and overseeing all operations up to 24-month-long process, including budget formation, fundraising, civic and church relations, all that in order to ultimately set the stage for over 500,000 people to hear the gospel. Great organization that has done a lot of great things around the world. But back to Pulse. Chris, could you share a few words about Pulse to help our listeners understand a little about how the organization operates and things like size and what kind of impact is happening?
Absolutely. Pulse is an evangelistic organization. We're a team similar to the Luis Palau Association or the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. We've been in existence officially since 2006. That's when we became a 501c3. The nonprofit was granted, and it was founded and is really built on the vision, the calling of Nick Hall. And our team in 2006 was Nick and a buddy. They left college, they raised support, and they went on mission really to see their generation, really this younger generation, come to know Jesus. And so from that point, it started to slowly grow. And I would say 2006 until 2010, when I joined, was just steady growth, a lot of impact that moved across really the state of North Dakota, which is where Pulse was founded. And then it continued to grow into Minnesota, into South Dakota, Iowa, into Wisconsin, having further and further impact, more invitations coming about to college campuses to reach them. And so the staff and the team started to grow in that time frame from 2006 to 2010. It was in 2008 that I actually joined the board of Pulse, being friends with Nick, having gotten to know him in 2004, having a common shared heart for a generation. I very much wanted to be engaged with what he was doing. I had a heart, obviously, and was also doing this work with the Luis Palau Association. So I had a lot to offer the board and what it takes to execute these events and the type of ministry that Pulse was going after. And so from there, I just began to talk to Nick about what would it look like if we worked together. I was on the team, the board was talking about it, and Pulse was growing to this size that they needed their first executive director. And in this season, I was in San Diego, California, directing a festival for Luis, and that's when God started to transition me into the organization here, which at that time was 4 people. And Nick was talking to another gentleman named Jay Anderson. Jay was a member of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, a young guy leading up some of their youth movement stuff. And so Jay ended up becoming team member number 5 before I became team member number 6 back in November 2010. And so since that time, we have grown from 6 people to we are about 25 today. And we've grown from an organization of a annual budget of $750,000 a year to last year's budget was just over $4 million. And due to a very large project this year, we're looking at a budget of around $12 to $14 million. And our team has just continued to see growth, opportunity for impact, and we've grown in our ability to be face-to-face with young people across our nation and even globally now. So we've grown also from an organization in North Dakota to a national group to actual global impact, and the global impact has started here in the last couple of years. So our scope has expanded dramatically, and we've seen just a huge opportunity for expansion, and we continue to see that today.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible growth. And I'm sure that there were some changes that had to happen to allow that to happen.
There were changes. We've gone through very different stages, I would say. I came on, again, as team member number 6, first executive director. Obviously, in this type of context, there's then a fair amount of fundraising. I'm okay with that. I'm not the best. I'm more of an operational, procedural, execution type person on the entrepreneurial side. So when it comes to actual raising money, we needed some help there. And we were fortunate to bring in a lady who had actually seen Nick grow up and then had a heart and a calling to actually come raise money for Pulse. That was one of the biggest steps and strategies that helped us grow. And God blessed her work. God used the story of Pulse in people's lives to say, we do want to see a generation impacted. We want to see people changed and transformed. And so her work was crucial in the growth of Pulse, and especially in the monetary side to impact more campuses. The other part of that was just from an administrative standpoint. We started to grow obviously in our donor realm, but we also were growing in the need for operational stability. And I was running a lot of it, both development, operations, and then even helping our events team execute on a consistent basis. And we actually then started to seek out who could we bring in operationally to help us kind of stabilize. And we started with an office manager. And, as a young team, young people, we didn't have to bring in a ton of experience to essentially move the needle, but that's where we started. We get an office manager in, they start handling our insurance. We actually move into the realm of having some of these things because, as a young organization, you don't have health insurance, you don't have, overarching different things yet until you get to that point of need. So that was some of the advancement, and we've had to continue to adjust some of those as we've moved forward in the years here.
Mm-hmm. And your role has changed in all that as well. You were brought in as the executive director, but then at some point during the growth stage, I assume there must have been a recognition of different skills needed. How did that shift happen, and how is that working now?
Yeah, it was. We've had some significant shifts in that way. The way it worked is after Cindy, who was a part of our team in the development side, she had chose to retire, be with her husband. His mother, who is older, so she was actually at retirement age, and she stepped away. We worked with another development individual that didn't work for us. Raising for money for evangelism is tremendously difficult at times, and it really just takes that right called person. So we transitioned from that, and so a lot of that burden fell on me, and as that kind of weighed into the ministry, we moved from even kind of the office manager standpoint that I'd mentioned here before into an overall VP of operations. So we were able to hire somebody in a VP of operations role that was able to take a lot of the burden off of me for day-to-day execution, audits, for managerial duties, all these other components such as insurance and that type of work. And she grabbed hold of that, as then I helped a little bit on the development side, grow that team. And that, again, took some of my attention away also from our events, which is our overall ministry impact. And Jay drove a lot of that. I jumped in when I could, but it wasn't quite as much. And so the ministry continued to expand, grow quickly. And it was really out of then that necessity, I came to a point where I was able to jump back into the events a little bit. Operations were in good order, but there was still so much scope of work that it was growing that we needed a little more direction, somebody who could take more time to spend with the board. I could actually work more on the ministry and the event side of things, overseeing all of our outreach components with different directors, training them up. So we started to hire more directors. We started to see more operational needs come in. And we also, of course, have our board work and everything that it takes to, work with your board, ensure that they have all the information that we can effectively lead the organization together. And so what we did is we decided that we were going to bring in a president, and there's a specific individual that we were targeting, looking for. Nick had on his heart. I really enjoyed the person that Nick was thinking of, whose name is Justin. And Justin and I had sat on the Pulse board together 2008 to 2010. Justin stayed on the board as I came in as executive director. So we had a working relationship in history. I appreciated the way he operated. And when we were making that transition, as you can imagine, it's a little bit like, how is this going to work? I became more of an executive vice president, executive director, kind of like, what's the title? Justin comes in as president. And then, of course, we have Nick as our founder and chief communicator. So the three of us then ended up becoming the Pulse executive team. And on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the higher level discussions, overarching vision, direction is given by the three of us. Nick casting the vision, handling high-level relationships, and then obviously our chief communicator, and he is the evangelist who is face-to-face with these million-plus young people each year. Justin then overseeing development, operations, helping steward the vision, work with the board, and then I'm able to devote my time wholly and completely to all of our event work. So this includes any of the campus events we do, the regional city outreach events, the international work that we've done in Ukraine, in Africa. And so we've been able to diversify then our leadership in that way so that our impact can continue to grow. And now I'm able to focus fully on that ministry side, which actually equates to typically about 70% of our budget. And so I'm overseeing that portion, and our team continues to execute in that way and progress forward. We also then have a leadership team that is made up of the three of us, of course, and then we have two directors right now that sit on that. One is Jay Anderson, another is Susan Harris, who is our communications director, overseeing our branding, all of our messaging that anybody could see at pulsemovement.com type situation or in our social media feeds. And that's kind of a little bit more now how we've landed, where we've been able to structure things into and create a good flow. Still with a lot of tensions here, though, as we continue to grow, for sure.
Right. And for an organization that's looking at embarking on this process, they feel like there's a big need, that there's some growth happening. I imagine that they'll get some insights out of that process that you went through. And to summarize it, and you can tell me whether or not I get this right, but one of the first things that you had to do was get some funding in. So you brought in that fundraising person, and then starting to do some basic operations with the office manager coming in. And at this point, the core team, you guys were all hands-on with the work. You were all doing it pretty much yourselves, but then stepping out and starting to build another layer of specialists that you were working with. So,
yep, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, the trajectory of our leadership team has been, I would say, rather normal, but yet difficult in some contexts because of the work that we're doing. And the development side was one that we needed to essentially solidify in advance quickly, because we're totally a donor-driven organization. We are funded by those who have a heart for evangelism. They have an ability to give what we do and have a desire to impact this generation. And so what I worked hard on was that development side. And in fact, one of the mistakes, and I don't even know if I called it a mistake, it's just an opportunity to learn and grow, and is that we had brought in another person above Cindy to help kind of advance the development side. And it was interesting because that individual came from raising $30 million a year. And when they came on board, them raising money, they weren't able to do it as effectively and as well at Pulse. And so it was an interesting learning lesson for us that, we really stuck to the person that God had called here. And when we did so, we saw our fundraising explode into that $4 million mark. So really in my first, this would have been 3.5-ish years, up to 4. It was Cindy and I working together, really empowering her through some trials and errors to take our development team to own it. And we moved into a whole new landscape of money being raised, of people wanting to give. And so Nick was a big part of that as well. But we worked on that because operationally I could handle a lot of those things, but then it just started to get to be way too much. And that's when I had to start to bring in and supplement that side of operations and just the day-to-day execution of paperwork, of accounting. We moved into the space as an organization where we had to have an annual audit, and we chose it to do it 1 year earlier than we would have had to. But I was able to bring in an audit firm that could handle that, so it didn't take a whole lot of work on my end. And again, just kind of keeping some of that work off of me so that I could handle the other components, day-to-day HR stuff, as well as just the ministry-related pieces. And so we did that so that we could build when we were smaller and younger. But in the end, it was worth kind of the effort in that moment, because now year after year we've had a lot of success in that area, just being well run, certainly transparent to all of our donors, to the public in and of it, all that we do. And so that was where, again, it moved from development, and then we very much operationally started things using some contractors to do so, because then we didn't have, a cash outlay that we couldn't cut off if we had to. And then we moved into more of the full-time people on board to handle all those details and responsibilities. And now, to date, we've been able to, again, build out that executive team that then has more of the executioners working below us as we continue to advance. And then now we're allowing them to build their teams out and empowering them and coaching them on, okay, you need to hire this person, go that route, okay, just that coaching mentality. So it's kind of moving from us handling all the details and taking care of all these things into a coaching aspect of, okay, here's how we've done it, improve upon it, grow it, change it if we need to. We want to maintain kind of our nimbleness as an organization. We're able to make decisions quickly, effectively, through prayer, through just the discernment of what's in front of us. And yeah, that's been our growth process. It's been messy for sure, but it's also brought us a long ways.
Great. And I'm sure it's been a fun process as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's a ton of fun. I always kind of go off the premise that even the bad days are good, and some days that can very much be still hard to say, but nonetheless, operating in this context with people that are passionate about what they're doing, who are called to what they're doing, it really is a lot of fun. And God links you together in these ways that you're experiencing wins and you're tackling challenges that you want to be in the trenches with those folks. And we've seen this happen time and time again. I mean, to hit 1 million young people a year and being face-to-face with them and telling them about the good news that we read in the scriptures has been amazing. And it's really not just that, but what also has been fun is that as we engage even donors and see them realize the impact that they can have as they go with us and we pray together and they come to events and they take part in the events, to see their lives transformed or to see them desire their kids to be engaged. And for instance, we've even had some key friends of the ministry whose kids have come in and interned, and we're not really easy on them either. We're like, okay, if you want to be here, this is hard work. Are you ready to go? And at the end of the day, they have been. And just to watch them grow, expand, and have an impact on, for most of them, it's the college campus, and they're in that context. But for them to have an impact there, it just expands their thinking and their mindset to say, holy cow, I'm accomplishing way more than I thought I could. And those types of things are very much just a ton of fun. And, I look back, I didn't anticipate Pulse to grow as quickly as it did. I joined the team thinking, I believe that there is a call on Nick's life. I believe I have a lot to offer from my business management background and my family business. But, I don't know how fast it'll grow. And all of a sudden to be where we are today, I would have never imagined that we could be doing what we're doing. I mean, this year we're planning for a 1 million person gathering on the National Mall. It's really kind of actually radical or crazy, or, I'm sure other people are thinking other things, and, I might have to agree with them sometimes like, you guys are nuts. Well, maybe, at the end of the day, it's a ton of fun to be able to do that and to have people who have great faith as well as understanding to go after these types of things.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'd like to go back to, you talked about bringing on somebody in a development position and didn't work out. And I recognize there's a lot of different types of fundraising out there, and there's people who can be successful with some organizations and not others. So I know it's not personal or about any individual. But how quickly were you able to identify that it wasn't a good fit? And how quickly did you move on addressing it and parting ways as friends, I would imagine, and reorganizing? How quickly did that happen?
Yeah, we basically brought the individual on, and from beginning to their last day was about 11 months. I would say that we started to realize within about 6 to 8 months roughly, they started to see how difficult of a time they were having. We were able to see it. We were able to have honest discussions throughout that process and to really dialogue about what are we doing, how can we do it differently, are we not telling the story correctly, have we not given you the right tools to succeed? So we had these conversations to essentially analyze, okay, it's not just your fault. What are we doing? What's the organization not doing to help you succeed in your role? And it just continued to kind of progress down that road, even though we made adjustments, even though we created different tools. And they saw it, we saw it, and we just had an honest discussion of, is this really where God has you? And it was determined by them and, of course, us that this isn't the right fit at this season. And though we all thought it was, it turns out that it's not. And so we sat down and we had that discussion, and there was agreement because we were all looking at the data, the facts of it. And, there's a spiritual component, I think, to some of it. What was the person doing in Pulse to teach us some things? What was God doing in their life to teach them some things? And so I still count this person, very great friend. We went into the season that we believe that God called us all into, and we also stepped out of it. And we didn't spend a lot of time in kind of like, oh, well, we're a ministry, we can't do this or that. No, we had very open, frank discussions, and we're quite quick about it, where I think it reflected a bit more of a business approach than maybe what some might experience as a ministry approach, where it's like, gosh, how can we just put this person over here and then they can just keep going and we don't have to part ways or we don't have to let them go. We're very much of the mindset, let's have an open dialogue, let's ensure the fit. That way everybody wins at the end of the day, even when the conversation is hard.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I wish we had like an hour more to dive back into some of the things that you've brought up. There's so much good meat here. But unfortunately, the calls are so short. Do you have any closing words of encouragement or inspiration for our listeners?
I would just encourage anybody that is passionate about what God has them in or is calling them to really push hard. I would say dream big, pray significantly, and go after it. And that's what we have done here. And as we have spent time investing in prayer, going after what we believe God has called us to do, despite the craziness of how it might seem, or even is it possible, could it happen, that if we go after that, God is faithful to show up in ways and in places that we couldn't have imagined. We have seen that. I have personally seen that in my 5 years here. And so I just encourage people, stick with it. Don't be discouraged in it, but look for what God has in each and every day-to-day movement of it all.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. And thank you to all of our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, nonprofitleadersnetwork.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. Join us next time for another edition of the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast.